Again. The word was sharp, a command cutting through the cold, sterile air. Dr. Sazak Vorn's 4 dark eyes narrowed as he observed the human, strapped to the examination table. The subject, labeled only as Specimen H-37, was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat, his muscles tense. His body was riddled with bruises, shallow cuts, and small burn marks where the alien instruments had done their work. And yet, he was still awake, still conscious. Sazak turned to his assistant, Till, a younger scientist whose scales trembled slightly as he adjusted the settings on the neural probe. Dr. Vorn, the pain index has already exceeded the predicted threshold. Any other species would have gone into shock or lost consciousness by now. Till's voice carried a note of hesitation. Then clearly, Sazak said, his voice smooth, "Our data is wrong." Till swallowed hard. The laboratory was silent except for the soft hum of alien machinery and the occasional, ragged breath of the human. On the other side of a thick observation window, a row of high-ranking Xelari officials watched with cold curiosity, their bioluminescent skin pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns. Sazak stepped closer to the human. His species, the Xelari, prided themselves on their intellect. They had conquered worlds, studied countless life forms, but never had they encountered anything like this. Pain was universal. It was a biological limit, a rule. But humans broke rules. Sazak leaned in, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "You should not be awake." The human, tall, battered, yet defiant, lifted his head slightly and smirked. "Yeah." His voice was rough, hoarse, but filled with something Sazak had not accounted for. "Then I guess your research is a little outdated." Before the scientist could respond, the human yanked hard against his restraints. The metal creaked. For the first time, something cold slithered down Sazak's spine. Fear. Till's grip tightened on the neural probe. "Doctor," the restraints. Crack. The metal gave way with a sickening snap. The human's right arm was free. Chaos erupted. Sazak stumbled back as H-37, no, as the man, ripped the restraint off his other wrist with sheer force. The Xelari scientists weren't built for combat. Their long, delicate fingers were made for instruments, not fists. Till lunged for the containment override, but the human moved fast. Faster than he should have. With one brutal swing, he slammed a fist into Till's thorax. The alien let out a sharp HSSKK and crumpled, bioluminescent skin flickering in pain. The observation chamber erupted in flashing lights and warning sirens. The high-ranking officials behind the glass recoiled, their pulsating colors flickering in alarm. Sazak knew what they were thinking. This was impossible. The pain levels alone should have rendered the human unconscious, paralyzed. Yet here he was, standing, fists clenched, eyes burning with something far more dangerous than pain resistance. Rage. Sazak barely had time to react before the human's bloodied fingers wrapped around his throat. "W8. The human lifted him. "You should not be awake," the human mocked, repeating Sazak's own words. His grip tightened, the scientist's throat clicking under the pressure. "Guess your research was wrong, huh?" Sazak's limbs thrashed weakly. He was a scientist, not a warrior. His people had never needed strength. They used ships, weapons, science to control other species. But humans didn't just endure. They fought back. Sazak's vision blurred. The alarms screamed louder. He could hear the heavy footsteps of security forces rushing toward the lab. And then, the human dropped him. Sazak collapsed, gasping, his elongated lungs sucking in air. He barely registered the human grabbing Till's ID tag and yanking a weapon from one of the fallen guards outside the containment chamber. The last thing Sazak saw before his vision went dark was H-37, standing tall, bloodied, battered, but unbroken. And then, he was gone. The corridor lights flickered red as emergency lockdown protocols engaged. Automated turrets slid from the ceiling, their sleek barrels swiveling toward the escaping human. H-37 didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, his bare feet slamming against the cold metal floor. The first turret powered up with a high-pitched whine, just before he dove into a roll beneath it. The air above him sizzled as plasma bolts seared past. He hit the ground, twisted mid-slide, and fired the stolen Xelari weapon. BZZT. The turret exploded in a shower of sparks. Up ahead, two guards rounded the corner, their luminescent skin shifting into warning red hues. They raised their weapons, but the human was already moving. He ducked low, dodging the first shot. The second, he didn't dodge. It burned. A bolt of white-hot energy clipped his shoulder, scorching flesh, but he ignored it. Pain was just a signal, just another barrier to push through. He tackled the first guard, driving his shoulder into the alien's chest. The Xelari crumpled under the sheer impact. With a savage twist, the human wrenched the alien's weapon free and fired point-blank at the second. One shot, then silence. His breathing was ragged, his body screaming at him, but he forced himself forward. There was no time to stop. Not yet. The Xelari had taken him, tortured him, tested him like he was some kind of lab rat. Now it was his turn to test them. The ship's layout was burned into his memory. He had spent weeks in this place, memorizing details from scraps of conversation, from the reflections in polished steel walls, from the guards' patterns. He needed to reach the hangar. The hallways blurred together as he ran. Sirens shrieked. Heavy boots pounded behind him. Then, up ahead, an obstacle. The final checkpoint before the hangar. Reinforced blast doors. A security station with a lot of guards. A voice crackled over the ship's intercom, cold and sharp. Specimen H-37, surrender now. There is nowhere left to run. He grinned. That's what you think. He tightened his grip on the stolen weapons, blood dripping from his knuckles. And then he charged. The Xelari guards braced themselves as H-37 barreled toward them. Fire. One of them hissed. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, burning streaks of light against the cold metal walls. H-37 didn't slow down. He weaved between shots with impossible precision, rolling low before launching himself into a full sprint. The nearest guard tried to raise his weapon, but the human was too fast. Crack! A brutal punch caved in the alien's chest, sending him crumpling to the floor. Another guard swung at him with a stun baton, but H-37 caught his wrist, twisted, and wrenched the weapon away. One fluid motion, one solid strike. The alien dropped. The last two guards hesitated, just for a second, but it was a second too long. The human flipped the stun baton in his hand and threw it. It spun through the air like a missile, striking one guard square in the face. The alien staggered, leaving the last guard alone, weapon shaking in his hands. They locked eyes. Then the Xelari made the worst mistake of his life. He ran. The human didn't bother chasing him. He was already moving, grabbing the fallen ID card and slamming it against the terminal. The blast doors hissed, mechanisms unlocking. Then a deep, rumbling thud shook the entire ship. The emergency failsafe had activated. The ship's AI spoke in its eerie monotone. Hangar lockdown engaged. All access restricted. Activating final security measures. The moment the words echoed, H-37 felt it. A presence. Something different. Something dangerous. He turned and saw it. A Xelari, 7 feet tall. Reinforced exoskeleton. Experimental combat enhancements. A walking nightmare. Its piercing white eyes locked onto the human. And then, in a voice laced with synthetic power, it spoke. Specimen H-37. You will not leave this vessel alive. The human wiped blood from his mouth, flexed his fingers, and smiled. We'll see about that. The enforcer stepped forward, its massive frame blocking the hallway. Every step it took shook the ground, the heavy sound of metal boots echoing through the now silent corridor. It raised a massive arm, its hand crackling with energy. A giant cannon built into the forearm hummed, preparing to fire. H-37 didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted his weight, eyes narrowing as he calculated his next move. He had no illusions about the enforcer's power. He had faced powerful enemies before, many powerful enemies. But this time was different. This wasn't about strength alone. It was about outsmarting the machine. The enforcer fired. A blast of blinding blue energy surged through the air, but the human was already moving. He dove to the side, rolling across the floor. The blast slammed into the wall behind him, leaving a smoldering crater. The enforcer's mechanical head snapped toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing. Target. evasive, retargeting. The cannon began to charge again, but the human was faster. H-37 rushed forward, grabbing the stun baton off the ground. In one fluid motion, he hurled it straight at the Enforcer's exposed power core, a glowing, pulsating energy unit at the center of its chest. Clang! The baton ricocheted off the metal surface. The Enforcer barely flinched, its armor too tough for anything short of a direct hit. But that wasn't the plan. While the Enforcer was distracted, the human sprinted to his right, sliding underneath a row of cargo crates just as another energy bolt streaked past his ear. His eyes darted around the space, analyzing. He could hear the machine's heavy steps drawing closer. Each moment counted. Think. His mind raced. Then he saw it. The central power conduit, a large, exposed wire snaking across the floor toward the control terminal. The terminal, if he could shut down the security system, he might have a shot at getting to the hangar. He needed to disable the AI before the Enforcer could track his movements. As the Enforcer drew near, H-37 darted across the room, faster than the machine could follow. The Enforcer's cannon fired again, but this time the human anticipated the trajectory. He dove sideways just as the shot tore through the space where he had been standing. He reached the control panel. With a desperate, final surge of strength, he slammed his fist into the override button. The power flickered. A buzzing hum filled the air. And then, AI system error. Security lockdown deactivated. The doors to the hangar slid open. H-37 grinned. Now it was time to run, but the Enforcer wasn't finished yet. It roared, stepping forward with a speed that seemed impossible for its size. Its cannon charged again, too quickly. This time, the blast wouldn't miss. With a primal yell, the human turned and sprinted, straight for the hangar doors, not looking back. The air crackled, the ground shook, and just as the energy blast surged toward him, H-37 dove through the open hangar doors. The hangar doors slammed shut behind him, the blast of energy just inches from his heels. He barely caught his breath as the rumbling behind him intensified. He glanced back to see the massive Enforcer's silhouette towering through the closing gap, its cannon charging again. But the door was almost sealed. The human's heart pounded. This was it. The final stretch. He wasn't going to make it. Yes, you are. The thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. There was always a way out. He had been in worse situations, far worse. He turned, eyes scanning the hangar. Dozens of Xelari ships, sleek, advanced, and deadly, lined the walls. He needed a ship, a fast one. And there, at the far end of the hangar, he saw it. A fighter-class ship, barely a quarter of the size of the Xelari warships, but fast, agile, and most importantly, unlocked. The cockpit glowed with a dull blue light, its engines already humming as if it were ready for takeoff. He sprinted toward it, ignoring the ache in his legs and the searing pain in his shoulder. The Enforcer's heavy footfalls echoed behind him. Not yet, not yet, not yet. The human slid under the lowered wing of the ship, pulling himself toward the cockpit. Bzzzt clunk. A shot from the Enforcer grazed the ship's exterior, sending sparks flying across the metal. He didn't waste a second. He climbed into the cockpit, hands shaking as he slammed the controls. Activate. Activate. The ship's engines roared to life. The Xelari fighter didn't need much time to warm up. Its compact design and advanced technology made it one of the fastest ships in the galaxy. A sudden crash sounded from behind him as the Enforcer lunged through the hangar's sliding doors. It was too large to fit fully through, but the top of its cannon squeezed through, taking aim. The human slammed the throttle. The ship shot forward, breaking through the hangar's force field with a violent burst of energy. The ship was already tearing through the atmosphere before the Enforcer could fully react. But the Enforcer wasn't finished. The massive machine's cannon fired one last time. A bolt of pure, concentrated energy that sliced through the air. The shot struck the rear of the ship. The human's heart skipped a beat as alarms blared across the cockpit. The ship jerked violently, the engine sputtering. But the ship held together. Just barely. Not today, the human whispered, his hands steady as he pulled back on the controls. With a final push, the fighter surged forward, breaking the atmosphere and soaring into the black void of space. The Xelari ships, far too slow to react, fell behind him, their glow dimming in the distance. He had done it. He had escaped. But as he leaned back in the cockpit, breathing in the cold, recycled air, he allowed himself one last glance at the wreckage of the Xelari research station, now a small dot in the distance. The mission wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the human set his course toward a distant, forgotten corner of the galaxy, a single thought raced through his mind. They may study us, experiment on us, but they will never understand us. And with that, the ship faded into the stars.